So, welcome you to this course on managing change in organization, and now we are going to run into sixth week of this course, and I hope that you have been doing well in this course on managing change in organization, and we have discussed lot of issues and addresses a number of problems which are important in the case of change management. Now, we are going to move further to discuss about another important issue after we have discussed about how to manage resistance, how to implement change, how to see that leaders are able to successfully implement and manage the political behavior of the employees. Moving further, one important aspect that need to be addressed is that how we are going to communicate change to the employees. So, it is very, very important that when you initiate any change effort, you need to engage support and commitment from the employees, and in order to get their support and commitment, you need to regularly communicate with the employees what is happening in relation to what is happening related to the change, basically what kind of change you want to bring, why you want to bring. So, you need to regularly communicate with the employees about the various aspects of the change that you want to proceed with. Now, there are a lot of issues related to change and its communication to the employees in the organization, especially the stakeholders, and most important stakeholder in organization is employees, because they are the person who are going to be directly affected by the change. So, in this lecture basically we will start discussing about the communication and the related issues of change. Now, what we are going to discuss is the role of the communication in the change management process. Now, if you look at communication, it definitely plays a very important role, because you need to engage with the employees. If you want to garner their support, if you want their commitment and change, then definitely you need to communicate regarding all the issues and aspects of the change, right. So, it could be considered to be one of the prerequisites you can say for change, right. So, the moment you identify that yes, you need to go for a change, this need to be communicated to the top management, and then when you are going to initiate the process, again you need to communicate it with the employees that yes, you want to go for a change. Because if you do not communicate, then probably you will not be able to get support, and there is a possibility of employees engaging in political behavior, there is a possibility of engaging and not being engaged with and committed to the change, right. There is a possibility of opposing the change, right, or resisting the change. So, all these possibilities are open if you are not able to communicate effectively related to the change. So, and you also need to develop strategies that how you are going to communicate, so that you can get their commitment and support, and that is why communication becomes very, very important in the change process. So, the role of the change managers is not only to manage the political behavior and resistance, but also engage with them, communicate with the employees, you can say more effectively. So, that you are able to create a sense of shared sense of direction. It means that you can get along with everybody, everybody knows what is being done, right. You are able to establish your priority by taking say concern of other people, and also you will be able to reduce disorder and uncertainty which may arise because you want to go for a change. And it would also facilitate learning, because in the process people would learn what is happening in the organization and how they are going to benefit out of it. So, role of communication is very, very important. So, what we are going to discuss in this lecture basically that how it is going to help the organization to facilitate effective change. So, three things are important, though we will discuss it further again in detail, but these three things are very, very important to start with. The first one is that you need to explain why change is happening, right. Say for example, you want to go for a technological change, or you want to go for restructuring your organization, or you want to change your supply chain management system, or you want to change your performance management system, recruitment policy, you want to go for a change. So, that your entire recruitment system is going to change. For example, you want to move from an offline to an online recruitment system, right, or you want to go for a bringing about a change in your technology. So, the moment you recognize the need for change and you say that you need to initiate this, right, you need to communicate it with the employees that why you want to go for a change, right. and you need to make them understand that okay, this is the rationale for which we want to go for a change. Say you want to introduce a new technology or you want to replace your old technology with a new technology, then people will obviously question that why you want to go for this kind of change. We have been productive, we have been maintaining quality, we have been doing well. So, why there is a need for change? So, you need to provide some kind of logic or an argument to the employees that this is the reason that why you want to go for a change. The reason could be better in terms of quality, more flexibility in terms of producing different kind of products, right. This would help you to maintain more accuracy in terms of quality. So, you need to make them understand by telling them the benefits of the change, that why you want to bring about this kind of change and how this change is going to benefit the organization in terms of their effectiveness, performance, reputation, all kind of things, all parameters of organizational performance, you can think about it. So, unless they are convinced about it, they would not go for it. Okay. So, the most important thing is that you need to communicate why you want to go for a change. So, you explain why change is happening, right. So, you need to talk about the rationale for the change, the logic and argument you need to provide going for a change. You also need to talk about the benefits and consequences. If you say that okay, with this technology we will be able to produce more products, variety of products which would increase our revenue, right. So, this is the kind of benefit and consequences of bringing about a new product, right. For example, you say you want to go for restructuring of the organization. So, you also need to talk about the benefits and consequences, that you want to do away with bureaucratic system, you want to be more open, right, transparent in your system, right, in your communication, in your coordination. That is why you want to move to a more horizontal system of structure, right. So, you need to talk about the benefits and consequences along with the motive for going for a change, right, and that is where you need to communicate. And you also need to communicate what exactly you want to go for a change, okay, and what is not being changed, right. And then once you bring about a change, you also need to tell people or show people where they are going, right. So, you tell them about the process of the change, right, and you also say that okay, these are the key milestones in the change process and this is how we are going to celebrate, right. Say for example, you want to bring about a more flexible manufacturing system. So, how this flexible manufacturing system is going to benefit you in terms of more productivity, better quality, more enhanced efficient production system, right. Similarly, with this whether you are able to produce more products, variety of products, so that you can capture better markets, more markets. Then you also need to tell them that how this technology is going to work and benefit us, right. So, you say that at the first stage probably you will be able to maintain more accuracy in terms of quality, it is going to increase your productivity level, because at the same time you can increase variety of products at the same time, because the earlier technology you can have only one product. So, for each product you had a technology. Now, all the products can be produced with this technology. So, that is the benefit that you are going to tell, right. So, you tell about the process, you also tell about the benefits, consequences, motivation, but all this need to be communicated to the employees, so that they go for it, right, and then show how they will get there. So, break it down into very clear simple steps. Okay, this is how we are going to proceed, this is what is going to happen and this is the direction of the process. This is how we are going to reach to that particular state. So, that once we are able to establish the new technology, this is what is going to happen to us. So, if it is communicated properly, probably you can reduce the political behavior, uncertainty and anxiety in the minds of the people, and that would result in very less resistance among the employees and you would be able to successfully implement the change. But if you do not communicate, then it is going to be very detrimental. People will have lot of questions, right, because they do not know what is happening, why it is happening, how it is going to benefit us, how it is going to benefit the organization. So, all these issues need to be resolved by the change managers, and the only option here you have communication. So, you need to communicate to the employees about everything that is happening related to the change. Now, how we are going to communicate? So, first point that I made here is that yes, you need to communicate, but you also need to adopt a process to communicate which is going to be more effective, right. So, how this change is going to be communicated is more important than the success of the program, right. So, you need to adopt a communication process. How are you going to communicate in terms of content, voice, tone, message, audience, medium, frequency, consistency, right. For example, how are you going to communicate it? What would be the content of the communication? How are you going to use it? Whether it is going to be through email in terms of medium or face to face or through a circular, right. Who is your target audience to whom you are going to communicate? Maybe if you are going for a technological changes, then your target audience is going, who is going to be most directly affected is the production department. So, are you going to communicate with the target audience? Are you going to your target audience is going to be all other departments as well, right. How frequently you are going to communicate this message and how consistent you are in your message, whether you are going to communicate the same message time and again or different kind of message. So, all these issues need to be looked into when it comes to communication process, right. And you also need to look at some problems related to the communication, like there should not be any message overload or distortion or ambiguity, because if these problems occur, then there could be a big problem. Let us look into these problems again. Message overload. When message overload happens, when you are going to provide the same message time and again, right. It means that there is a more message that a person can read and respond to compared to the message that is being received by him, right. So, if there is a message overload, probably will not be able to read, interpret and respond to these messages. So, this is not good. If the messages gets distorted, how the meaning of the message is being interpreted through various channels, right. Because the interpretation of a message is dependent on the receiver, right. So, the sender who is sending a message has a content, has a medium, has a channel through this is being communicated, okay, to a target audience. Now, the target audience is going to interpret the message, and if you misinterpret it or distort the message at his level and then sends it further, then it gets further distorted, right. So, it comes to sending or receiving of the message, and you need to ensure that the message does not get distorted across levels in the hierarchy or when it is being interpreted by one person or the other person, right. And then clarity of the message ambiguity, that is equally important. So, when we are talking about message ambiguity, it happens when you do not have a clear vision, right, and everybody looks at things in a different way. It means that the message that is being communicated is not clear. Okay. So, if you want to go for a change, so must make sure and communicate the kind of change that you want to bring, why you want to bring it, make it clear so that people do not make different kind of interpretations, and very clearly state what kind of change you want to bring and who is going to affect it directly and indirectly by this kind of change, right. So, that you are able to reduce these kind of problems related to the communication. Next, what, how and how of communication. What is being communicated, right. Managers can communicate about anything, but they cannot communicate everything. So, implicitly or explicitly they need to make a choice about what is to be communicated, right. So, they need to communicate something which makes sense, which could be understood and interpreted by the people in the organization, those who can understand it better. So, there is no need to communicate everything and anything, you need to communicate only the relevant thing. So, this point makes a sense, that is we always need to communicate which makes sense in terms of its content. Then who, right, how it is going to impact the person who is being communicated, right. So, what kind of network you are going to follow to communicate to a person, right. So, they also take decisions in which that is going to impact the communication network. Suppose it is a hierarchical system and it is being communicated from the top management to the person who is on the bottom line. So, it is coming through a hierarchical channel of or a network of communication which is vertical in nature. Then how this the message is being say communicated, and you also need to ensure that this message that is being delivered through a network or channel does not get distorted or it is very, very clear. Okay. Similarly, who are the members with whom you are going to communicate? Are you going to communicate it with everybody, or you are going to communicate with some people? A general message can be circulated to everybody, but suppose you want to bring about a change in one part of the organization, then you need not communicate with everybody, you can communicate only with that particular department, right. For example, you say that okay, you want to bring about a new recruitment system, then you can communicate with the line managers of all the departments and the HR department, because they are most directly affected, right. Then how you are going to communicate? What is your preferred channel? Okay. And that is very, very important, because the channel sometimes create noise, sometimes try to distort the message. So, all these things must be kept in mind when it comes to communication. So, moving further, what we are going to discuss is related to these issues, that yes, you need to ensure that when you are going to plan your any kind of communication related to the change, you need to decide about a lot of issues that may come across. For example, in the earlier slides we have seen that you need to identify what is to be communicated, with whom to be communicated, and how it is to be communicated, right. So, when you are going to plan a communication for change, you must have a clear vision and objectives for change, right. And if you have a very clear vision and objective for change, then you talk about the project related to the change, identify key milestones of each stage of that particular change, identify your target audience who is going to be affected directly, indirectly, in whatever way, and identify your channel for communication, identify who is going to communicate, whether it is going to be change manager or the line managers, or you have a spokesperson on the behalf of the organization who is going to communicate this information to the employees, and what could be the resources and time frame for the project. This is what needs to be communicated, right. So, moving further, the first point that we need to identify, that looking at the target audience, who is to be communicated. So, the most important thing is, the first point that I want to make here is that you need to segment your audience with whom you are going to communicate, whether you are going to communicate with the wider community, everybody, employees, stakeholders, vendors, suppliers, or you are going to communicate it with the parties which are going to be affected by the change only. So, those who are going to be directly affected by the change, or those who are having close interest in this kind of thing, line managers, HR managers, or the stakeholders, various stakeholders in the process. So, you need to identify who is going to be the target audience for the change, and then you need to focus upon them, right. So, audience segmentation is very, very important. Moving further, what we are going to talk about is that yes, apart from stakeholders, when you are going to communicate change to those who are going to be directly affected. So, what you are going to tell them? Why is this happening? Rationale for the change, what is going to change, when it is going to change, how it is going to affect you, your job, and what will happen to me, because they are going to be directly affected. So, this is what needs to be communicated to those who are directly affected, those who are having close interest. Again some questions, how it is going to affect their work, what is the benefit for them, and how I can get more out of it. Then wider community, again certain questions like why it is happening, how it is going to affect their work, whether things would really change, and how would it cost. Say if you have taken the case of a university, how would it cost to the university, I mean what is the cost of the change, that you also need to communicate to the employees. Next is when you are going to plan communicate to the change, again the same questions, directly affected, I mean what kind of change you want to bring. For example, how it will be different, this technology is the new technology that you need to communicate. What would happen to my role, whether my team would change, whether my manager would change, will my work location would change, job security issues, where I can raise issues or concerns related to this change, how I can get involved. So, you need to be communicated along these lines. Those who are closely interested with this project related to the change, some questions that could be asked is related to this one, and then similarly some question can be asked to the wider community, right. So, you need, when you are going to plan the communication related to the change, you need to identify your target audience, right, who are going to be directly affected, closely interested, a wider community, because for each one of them you need to have a different communication plan, where you are going to communicate things related to the questions that have been addressed here. Okay. And then you need to resolve these issues related to these questions that is going to be addressed to directly affected, closely interested or wider community people. Now, moving further, when it comes to implementing the communication plan, again you have to tell them what will happen over the next few months, how it is going to, what would be the process basically, how will know if you are on the right track, how we are going to monitor the progress, when will the change affect me taking place, at what stage I am going to be affected and what stage I am going to take part in this, right. Similarly, those who are closely interested, what changes are happening and when, how will they affect me, what will the services I use will be disrupted, how I can raise the issues, and then community will ask questions, the general community related to the organization will ask these questions, again what is changing and why, what are the benefits, how it is going to affect my work, general employees, right, how much it is going to cost. So, all these questions must be addressed, whether it is related to planning communication, right, implementing the communication plan for the organization. So, you need the content that you are going to decide what is to be communicated, it depends upon with whom you are going to communicate it. So, what you are going to communicate it, content, with whom you are going to communicate it, that is also very important, and then third point that we discuss is the channel of communication, that we will take up later, right. So, we will move to the third point. See here, if you look at this graph related to the implementation of communication plan, this talks about the influence. On the one side you have influence, on the other side you have urgency, right. When you are going to communicate, right. At different time periods you are going to inform them or communicate with them, right. So, if you look at this, if the highly urgent and highly influential, then you need to engage them. It means, these are the people who need to be communicated first, immediately, right. Then these people inform now, then these people high influence, but low urgency, you can plan about them, but you can engage them later, they need to be communicated, and these people should be communicated the last. So, this talks about the preference, who is to be communicated when, right. So, those having high urgency and high influence, it means those who are directly affected people, they need to be communicated first, right. Then the closely interested people and then the other people. Now, we will talk about the third point, that is related to communication channel, paper based communications through websites, or the most important is face to face communication, right. So, if you are going to use a paper based communication system, so it is good for digesting complex information. If you need to provide lot of information in detail, then you go for this, right. It could be used along with face to face communication. Suppose there are complex messages which you want to say inform to the employees, right. You should not only rely on paper based communication, because sometimes people do not read, some people sometimes send them in trashes, right. So, it should always be complemented with face to face communication. A website, if you want to provide factual information, okay. If you want to provide information quickly, because the information is already in the website, right. It could be a primary channel, but you cannot communicate sensitive information, and it does not provide any information about the behavior of the employees, right. And the best one is face to face communication for difficult messages, right. It is related to bring about a change in the behavior and the people. So, it is the best form of communication, right, and it has to be used as a primary channel of communication, right. But very complex and detailed information must be supplemented by paper based communication, because the details can be given there and then you can explain them face to face what is happening, right, relate to the change. Now, moving further, we will talk about other issues like face to face channel, which is the most primary channel. The benefits of the primary channel is that is you will be in a position to articulate well whatever you want to communicate in terms of content, right. You can use appropriate tone, you can look at the reactions of the employees, because you can gauge the non-verbal behavior of the employees as well. You can check whether the people have really understood the issues or not, and you can take corrective action in terms of say certain misconceptions which have come out among the employees, okay. And you can also reassure them if there are certain issues or if they have addressed certain concerns that can be taken care by the change managers. So, the primary channel, the face to face channel has certain advantage over other channels, but if you are using secondary channels like websites, question answers, email, e-bulletin, staff newsletter and email box, it also has certain benefits, but compared to say primary channel, that is face to face communication, it is not that advantageous. Some of the benefits like website, it provides quick information, you can check facts and figures. Question and answers are given to tailored information related to the subject, right, what will happen. So, you can say the kind of change that you want to have and various facts and answers related to that can be given. And then you can email, because it is easy to communicate through email everything. For example, if you want to bring about certain updates, you can provide, but if you want to go for restructuring, then if you are sending a mail, then there could be a lot of apprehension among the employees. E-bulletins can be used for regular updates to tell them about the milestones that have been achieved during the change. Okay. You can also circulate through staff newsletters, right, tell them your successes, failures also, right, or email box where you can ask them about the questions, concerns, ideas related to the change. So, secondary channels are also benefit. So, what we can do that, okay, let us go for primary channel which could be supplemented by the secondary channel, right, to provide for facts and figures and the milestones and other issues that may come in across change. Moving further, sorry. So, when we are going to talk about the secondary channel, we have to decide that why we want to use a particular channel and when. So, let me give you some examples. For example, if you take the primary channel when we are talking about face to face which allows you to have this. So, if we are going say for bringing about a change in the technology, if you are going for restructuring exercise, right. So, what kind of channel need to be used to communicate well? In my opinion, if you want to go for restructuring as suggested, then you should go for a combination of both primary channel as well as secondary channel. So, through secondary channel paper based information, what you can do? You can provide lot of information related to the kind of change that you want to bring about, the details about the change, how it is going to impact and benefit, what is the rationale for the change, all this information can be communicated easily. But if you go and tell people using this particular medium, that is face to face channel, probably you will be in a better position to articulate and communicate with the employees the reasons for going change, right, and your verbal and non-verbal language that we use, your voice, message, right, content, all this will matter, especially in face to face channel. In other channels, other channels like secondary channel, what happens? These things are absent. So, the kind of cues that is given by these face to face channel is not available in secondary channels, right. For example, they would be in a better position to gauge your reactions if you are going for some kind of radical changes, say technological changes, or when you are going for a restructuring exercise or business process engineering, right. So, you will be in a better position to address their concerns. If they are raising any issues, they have certain questions that could be answered immediately. But if you secondary channel, what will happen? Suppose you sent a mail that organizations have decided to go for restructuring, and this is how we are going to proceed. So, it looks more like adopting a director approach, where you say that okay, we want to go for this kind of change, let us accept it, right. And there could be a lot of issues that need to be resolved, right. There could be issues related to resistance, there could be issues related to power base, right. There could people might engage in political behavior, right. Managers tend to engage in these kind of behaviors if their status and power is disturbed, right. So, the basic objective of communicating is to manage resistance and to ensure that people do not engage in political behavior. And the third reason is that you can get their support and commitment to the change, right. So, these are the three primary reasons because of which we need to go for communicating the change, right. So, you need to adopt a medium of communication that is very important, okay. And that is why when we were talking about these three kind of channels, okay, then the best is what you call the face to face channel, then the next best is this one, and finally, this. The use of website should be minimum, because website is used only to provide information, right. But if you are using primary channels, that is always good, because you can clear a lot of dust in the air. You will be able to tell them everything that is coming in their mind, and they would be, you can get better support for the change compared to any other method. Comparatively, if you are using secondary channels, then it would create a lot of problems. So, what needs to be done, that you use primary channels, but in addition to primary channels, what you need to do is that you also adopt secondary channels to ensure that your communication is more effective. And if your communication is effective in the sense you have decided about the content, what is to be communicated, whom to communicate it, whether you are going to communicate with the only select stakeholders or to everybody. So, you need to identify your target audience, and then what kind of channel you are going to use for communication. Then if you on all these three parameters, if you have been able to do your homework, probably you will be in a better position to communicate effectively, right. So, in this lecture what we have discussed is that when it comes to communicating change, what needs to be done and how do we go about it. Okay. Thank you very much.